All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Central Asia Program seminars at the IRIS at George Washington University. My name is Sebastian Perouz. I'm a research professor working with the Central Asia Program. So this seminar today is dedicated to soft power in Central Asia, as you saw, of course, on the agenda. I mean, it is based actually on a volume on an edited volume entitled Soft Power in Central Asia, The Politics of Influence and Seduction, that I edited with my colleague, Kirill Nurjanov, who works at the Australian National University. This volume has been published by Lexington Books, which is part of Roman and Littlefield Group. And this book includes a dozen of contributors, and we have the chance. I'm very happy to have several of the contributors today in this seminar. So why this volume? Well, because since the breakup of the Eastern Bloc, Central Asia has been analyzed primarily through the prism of hard power and of the great powers, geopolitical and geostrategic games in the regions, which means that this approach has consisted of studying the military, economic, security games of alliance and the agreements and rivalries involving external powers and Central Asian states. And yet, the time of coercion through the exercise of exclusively military or economic hard power is over. I mean, any state, geographically close or distant, powerful or more modest, that aspires to influence, has engaged in soft power policy to enlist the hearts and minds of local people, including the elites. So soft power policy has become essential to supporting or guaranteeing the sustainability of any foreign state's political relations and economic investments. And all the major influential actors in the region have engaged in a soft power policy in Central Asia. It begins, of course, with Russia, China, whose economic and even political impact is debated. We have also included other essential actors, such as Turkey, which is close to the region through its political and economic relations and its cultural and linguistic proximity, and which plays an important role. And beside other actors like the US and the European Union, which are, of course, addressed in this book in two separate chapters, we have included less prominent actors in the region because of their more limited political and economic relations with the countries of Central Asia, such as Israel, but which nevertheless managed to develop a policy of soft power in the region. Another important point is that the study of soft power is generally studied from the angle of the politics of states and their entities. But soft power is also exercised by international organizations, by international non-governmental organizations, and by domestic non-governmental organizations. And this is addressed in one chapter, which is written by Karina Kludzewski and Peyam Forigi, who are both with us today. So they're going to talk about that, of course. So we tried to address in this book the diversity, the multiple dimensions of soft power in Central Asia. I mean, as I said, the multiplicity of the actors, but also the multiplicity of their goals, how they implement soft power, the multiplicity also of the challenges that actors face in implementing soft power, and also very importantly, we addressed in this book how soft power is viewed, how soft power is received in Central Asian countries by the government, but also by the populations. I mean, the Central Asian countries and their actors are not passive objects, of course, in the process of politics of soft power. Central Asian states are by no means mere pawns in the regional or global political games of a handful of powerful states. So I'm really grateful to have several contributors of this volume today on this seminar. Before giving the floor to Kirill to give him a chance to introduce briefly this volume 2, let me maybe mention briefly some logistical questions. So as you saw on the agenda, we will have two panels. The first one that will start in a few minutes will address soft power projection in Central Asia, the United States, Russia, and China and Turkey. A second one entitled Between Attraction and Fear, how recipient countries welcome, frame, or resist soft power, will start at 11:15. So each speaker will have about 10 minutes to present. We have 4 speakers per panel, and the 4 presentations will be followed by a Q&A session. So please feel free to send your questions in the chat box to the moderator of the panel. Thank you all. I mean, thank you all the contributors, again, who accepted to participate in this volume, and to those who found time to participate in this seminar today. And thank you, by the way, to our colleagues who are in Australia. I know it's very late. And Kirill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for such a majestic introduction. You covered all the bases, so I just want to say a few words, return a debt of gratitude to you, because had it been just a single edited volume, it would have been finished in half the time. It's my leadership that dragged the proceedings unnecessarily, but as you said, we had so much fun working with our esteemed colleagues and probing this question of soft power in Central Asia, which presented unique challenges. It's really the first omnibus study of soft power projection in Central Asia of its kind. And we made some interesting discoveries working as a collective. So I would like to, again, pick up where Sebastian left off and advise the participants who may think about buying this book or borrowing it to read it. It has its glorious collection of 9 roller coaster chapters that really cater to sensibilities and academic preferences of pretty much anybody who does social sciences. But a word of advice: if you are into straightforward political science, then start reading in the correct order, chapter 1, 2, 3. However, if you want to save your time, if you're interested in the social anthropology or sociology, then perhaps the reverse order is much advised. And Sebastian mentioned the Payam and Carolina's chapter 9, and it's absolutely fantastic for those of us who are coming slightly from the left field of social sciences, because it's such a good example of how desktop research combined with participatory observation research yields really amazing results. So for me, and I'm sure that this sentiment is shared by all the colleagues, 3 themes or 3 issues really arose from working on the phenomenon of soft power projection in Central Asia. And the first one is purely terminological or definitional, because after working for over a year, or maybe close to 2 years on the project, none of us is actually none the wiser about what soft power really is. Because I actually lost count. I measured about 50 different definitions across 9 chapters, and I gave up. The only common denominator really is that somehow it's all related to the ideas of Joseph Nye, the grand guru of soft power. But then the development of his basic idea that soft power is all about causing someone to want things that you want. The evolution of this idea, its interpretation, its indigenization on the ground by the Central Asians themselves is absolutely astonishing. And this is one of the strongest features of the book. Some people refer to Joseph Nye's theory as sloppy, but I prefer to think about it as a supple theory that really accommodates all sorts of possibilities that we cover in this edited volume. The second point is that, of course, Joseph Nye's original theory was deeply steeped in the liberal idea. And that's what this volume, at least some of its chapters, begins to probe, pointing out to the fact that a certain Western liberal triumphalism is quite inappropriate in deciding what kind of soft power works and what kind of soft power does not work in Central Asia. Straightforward normative projection and the trumpeting, the imposition, the assumption that Western liberal Jeffersonian democracy automatically wins hearts and minds is a bit wobbly, to be honest with you, based on the research that we can find in this volume. And the third issue, and for me it was really exciting because I dabble in qualitative research, and all things quantitative bemuse, bedazzle, and frighten me. But there is an issue of how to measure soft power, because it's very easy to say that China is rising, Russia is plateauing, and America is nowhere to be seen in light of the events in Afghanistan and elsewhere. But how do we justify and corroborate such glib observations? And one of the most interesting aspects, at least for me, in working with individual chapters and conducting my own research, was the variety of very interesting methods of how people inside and outside the region actually assess the success or failure of soft power projection. And if you bother to read the introduction, actually we use one example from Kazakhstan, where a particular author, maybe in a moment of humor or in a paroxysm of cynicism, devised a little equation. According to him, so in terms of soft power projection, one visit by the head of state equals 10 new film releases, equals 100,000 tourists, and also equals the disbursement of governmental aid to the tune of $100 million. So I'm not going to be presumptuous, I'm not into policy advice, but let's pause and think for a second that Central Asia happens to be one of the few areas in the world where the foot of the United States president never touched the ground. And on this happy thought, I'm happy to stop and pass the baton over to Carolina, who will actually introduce the chapters of the volume. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kirill. So we're going to start the first panel, and Carolina, so as a moderator of the first panel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So here we start panel number one, which is titled Soft Power Projection in Central Asia, the United States, Russia, China, and Turkey. So here we will speak about what is projected and also what is the reception, but we will focus more closely on the reception in the second power, on reception of soft power. My name is Karolina Kluczewska from Ghent University. I will moderate. We have 4 presenters here. Each of them will speak for 10 minutes, and then hopefully we'll have 20 minutes for Q&A. So you can already write your questions in the chat as they come to your mind during the presentations. And we can start with Vincent Altman, who is an instructor of peace and conflict studies at Wayne State University. His research explores the intersection of secularism, ideology, identity, and territory with a regional focus on Eurasia. And he's the author of a chapter on US soft power in Central Asia. Please, Vincent.
Thank you very much, Carolina, and Kirill and Sebastian as well. I'd like to thank everybody also on behalf of my co-author, Alexander Diener, who I'm not sure is here today, but asked me to step in and present this. So yes, I wrote or co-wrote, I suppose, the chapter on US soft power in Central Asia, which was a lot more challenging than I thought it was going to be, because in many ways, I kept coming up with the question of, okay, well, is there anything else? And reviewing that chapter in preparation for this talk, I realized that in some ways, an awful lot has changed since I wrote that chapter and since that chapter was published. But at the same time, interestingly, very little has changed. And of course, what I'm referring to is the fact that the United States is pulled out of Afghanistan, which to a substantial degree, that it was the U.S. presence in Afghanistan that at least for the last 20 years or so was really driving American soft power efforts in Central Asia. Ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. has taken a middling interest in the region overall. Much of the early engagement was focused on promoting democracy and promoting especially the sovereignty of the Central Asian states, putatively in opposition to what we viewed maybe as meddling from Russia, but increasingly from China, of course, promoting free trade and markets and these sorts of things. But over time, it seemed that the American footprint in the region, as Kirill pointed out, the American president has never left a footprint in Central Asia as such, and indeed, sort of at a more institutional or state level, it's been quite a bit weaker than in other parts of the world. Ever since, of course, the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, much of America's involvement in the region has been in the service of making sure that either there have been transportation routes for troops into and out of Afghanistan, of course, at the Karshi-Khanabad base, former base in Uzbekistan, and the Manas base in Kyrgyzstan, both of which ended up being closed. At the same time, there were efforts toward promoting regional economic integration, particularly including Afghanistan. But again, many of these kinds of things now seem a bit quaint because, of course, the United States is pulled out of Afghanistan, and it's very difficult to see the US really getting involved in the region in any major way into the future. I think, again, reviewing some of the things that have been published over the last few months about President Biden's interest or potential interests in the region has demonstrated that, again, in some ways, not much has changed. Former Ambassador George Kroll, former ambassador to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, pointed out that it doesn't really seem that the United States is going to be involving itself to a much greater degree in the region now than it was before. I don't think that there's going to be a massive pullout from Central Asia, but more or less the sort of detached disinterest that has mostly characterized American presidents' approaches to the region is likely to continue. I think with the rise of the Taliban and the reorientation of some of the local governments, with the notable exception of Tajikistan, toward maybe working with the Taliban government in Afghanistan, we might see American efforts to work through those governments to get what we want or try to influence things in Afghanistan. But militarily, we are not going to be involved there. And in terms of economic or political influence, we've never had an awful lot in the region compared to other countries. The other thing that I've seen, and that has been an undercurrent in American thinking about Central Asia, and that has not changed, is that this is, in some respects, at least from a policy perspective, a region of the world that's characterized by great power conflict, or at least contestation between the forces of the West and Russia, and increasingly, of course, China. And reading through some things that have been published ever since March of 2021 and up through September of this year, it seems that there are a lot of observers who more or less see whatever America's interests are in Central Asia largely being or continuing to be aimed toward checking Russian and Chinese influence, which again is very much a continuation of the kinds of policies that we have pursued in Central Asia almost since the very beginning. I could go on, but again, I feel like in some ways an awful lot has changed, but not very much has changed as well. I don't foresee the United States spending a lot of money or spending a lot of diplomatic effort to sway local countries, particularly since we no longer have the Afghanistan quagmire, as it were, drawing our interest. And I think to the extent that we are going to involve ourselves in terms of soft power, which really has, with the exception of the invasion of Afghanistan, of course, soft power really being the primary lever of American influence in the region, that's going to remain a relatively muted and secondary or even tertiary concern. Hillary Clinton's New Silk Road has long since sort of fallen by the wayside. It never had much support to begin with. And China's Belt and Road Initiative is and always has been in the region far more important. That's not going to change. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'm not sure that I have much more to add, but I can certainly take questions in the question and answer period.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And our second speaker is the co-editor of this volume, Kirill Nourjanov, who is a senior lecturer and convener of PhD studies at the Center for Arab and Islamic Studies at the Australian National University. And his main research specialization is on Central Asian politics and international relations, but he also covers Islamic radicalism, Eurasian politics, and the history of Tajikistan. And he's the author of the chapter on Russian soft power in Central Asia. Please, Kirill.
Thanks, Carolina. And I'm very much in the same frame of mind as Vincent, that some things change, some things don't change. And I wish I had a crystal ball a couple of years ago to predict whether Russian soft power in Central Asia. But I must say that when I started developing a draft for the chapter, I was full of lots of sort of ideas that were deeply ingrained in my mind. And the first thing that I associate with the words Russian foreign policy is over-bureaucratized, controlled by Putin, and arrogant and condescending towards the former Soviet republics. Some of these preset ideas indeed I found proven in the course of my research. Some of them were not. What I argue in the chapter is essentially a couple of big things. And the first one is that Russia is a relative newcomer to the game of soft power projection. We can trace it back only to 2010, and in many ways, Putin's and the Kremlin's interest in soft power in the former USSR was reactive. It's that Putin and his buddies woke up one fine morning and decided, well, too many colored revolutions, we are living in a besieged citadel, let's do something about countering pernicious Western influences. Hence, soft power projection project was born. And of course, true to my suspicion, that exercise in soft power projection was originally very rigidly tied to Russian foreign policy writ large. In fact, it was very much a poor cousin of hard power, sharp power, whatever you call it. I did some digging and discovered that the total budgetary allocation for soft power projection within the consolidated budget of Russian foreign policy is only about 3%. And in the early days, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov actually struggled to find any examples of what soft power is actually, and why you spend millions of rubles on whatever you are doing. And all he had to say for himself, oh, well, we set up a Russian museum in cyberspace, and whether you are in Berlin or Bishkek, you can log on to some portal and enjoy the masterpieces from the classic period of Russian painting. Of course, this was around 2010 to 2015. Then things began to gain momentum, and that's where my original misconceptions or preconceptions began to unravel a bit. Because very quickly the Russian soft power projection project in Central Asia came of age and became quite efficient, I would say. And one condition, one aspect of this efficiency is that in my analysis, a lot of hubris, a lot of this post-imperial mentality where Central Asians are viewed as our little brown brothers have been jettisoned by the Russian leadership, which is now quite serious in terms of respecting the multi-vector foreign policy of the Central Asian republics, and does not set as an objective the kind of crude quarreling of all Central Asian republics into one integrative union or the other. Even the umbrella term, the Russian world, is no longer used that much when we talk about Russian soft power projection in Central Asia. So in some ways, this story of evolving Russian soft power is also the story of evolving institutions in charge of this soft power. Those of you who do Central Asia and speak Russian would be familiar with the acronym Россотрудничество, which is a Russian specialized agency in charge of soft power projection. Well, now it's under new dynamic leadership. The name of the new projector-in-chief is Yevgeny Primakov, and during his first day in office, he said, no more balalaikas, accordions, and busts of Pushkin, and silly concerts before Russian dying members of the diaspora in Central Asia. We have to be cold-hearted and pragmatic. We have to identify the objects of our projection very clearly, and it's not our fellow compatriots, it's young and dynamic Central Asians. So it's still very much work in progress. Again, compared to the British Council or Goethe Institute, the Россотрудничество agency has a minuscule budget, but it's growing. So that's the official side of the story. What I was really surprised about is that the activities of Россотрудничество and the foreign ministry of Russia, even of Putin himself, is just the tip of the iceberg. I was really mesmerized by the density of people-to-people contacts or region-to-region contacts between Russia and Central Asia. One fact that is etched in my cortex now is that 75 out of 85 regions of the Russian Federation have some kind of cross-border cultural exchange programs with Kazakhstan. 75 out of 85. Which other country in the world can boast this kind of density of the relationship? But the most important discovery I made, and I was kind of unaware of this until I started writing this chapter up, is that a lot of Russian soft power in Central Asia exists not so much because of the activities of the Russian government. Well, no, I can't say it's also despite the activities of the Russian government. It's kind of in parallel to the activities of the Russian government. Essentially, the point is that since about 5 years ago, the Russian cultural products, the Russian language, the whole Russophilic sphere began to gain momentum for reasons that are still not clear to me, or insofar I can understand, well, to researchers out there. So thus, this combination of greater attention, well, relatively speaking, of the Russian government to matters of soft power projection, plus this general feeling across Central Asia. Can't talk about Turkmenistan, but most certainly in Kazakhstan, in Tajikistan, and in Kyrgyzstan, Russian is sexy. Russian is the language of the urban elite, not English, but Russian. It's also the corporate language. Plus, of course, the inevitable added asset of labor migration to Russia from Central Asia. This puts a lot of wind into the sails of Russian attractiveness across the region. And the final comment I would like to make is about a particular instrument of soft power projection, commonly known as strategic communication. We all hear about Putin's hybrid warfare and Russian propaganda, and this may well work in the West, targeting NATO countries. In Central Asia, comparatively speaking, it's negligible. All I could discover was the activities of Sputnik, which is a multimodal platform associated with RT. But beyond that, it's not the Russian government that forces the locals to consume the Russian news. It's that the local people like the format, the content, perhaps the way the presenters dress, delivering Russian news. And again, this falls into the rubric of almost accidental projection of soft power, and that maybe it's just a matter of fashion. Maybe within 10 or 20 years, this fascination with all things Russian will give way to similar fascination with all things English. But for the time being, I dare say that Russia is among the top, if not the top, soft power projector in Central Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirill. So our first speaker is Murat Yurtbilir from Istanbul Ishik University. And Murat is interested in Turkish domestic politics and foreign policy, nationalist and ethnicity studies, as well as international relations. And based on this interest, you can guess that his chapter in this volume is about Turkish soft power in Central Asia. Please, Murat.
Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you for that book. It was a real big contribution to the region and to understanding the different countries' projection of their soft power. My chapter is the trajectory of the Turkish soft power in the region. In the start, I decided to take a look the fields which are limited to education, religious affairs, culture, and development aid towards the region. And I started to look these fields, the education, culture, and the religious affairs. But the first thing I encountered while dealing with the soft power of the Turkey, it has been changing. It changed so much from 1990s till today. In 1990s, there was this dreaming attitude to the Central Asia. It is because the Turkish people and the ordinary people I am talking about, together with the bureaucrats and most of the politicians, the mood was there's a place there to be discovered, to conquer, to sell something. Conquer, I'm not talking about the military term. So let's go there. I was thinking at that time, oh, this is some kind of rush to gold movement. So everybody was moving to Central Asia from Turkey. I was living in a small town at that time. A bakery in that small town was thinking to go to Central Asia and open some kind of bakery there. So all these small and medium enterprises from Turkey, they were dreaming to do this. And then there was a rush to Central Asia at that time. It was a religious rush. It was by the state. It was an education campaign, student exchanges, but also never the bigger businesses of Turkey, but lots of thousands of small and medium enterprises went there. The elder brother syndrome, we are the Turkish brothers, you are Turkish, we are Turkish. Such kind of dreaming was going on in 1990s. Then the change happened, the Turkish policy, soft power and the hard power, everything, just look, perspective about the Central Asia became more realistic. And then they understood that there is some other realities on the region. So they are not welcoming you, just, oh, my brother, welcome here. We are all together, the Turkic, tyrannic nations. So the people, the ordinary people, the bureaucrats, the policymakers understood the region starting with the 2000s. But after 2000, Justice and Development Party came to the power in Turkey. And if we forget about the first 5-6 years when the Justice and Development Party was trying to consolidate its power in Turkey, slowly the Turkish weight the focus in the foreign policy switched to neo-Ottoman lands, the Middle East mostly, particularly after the Syrian civil war and the Kurdish issue, all such kind of things. The main focus became the Middle East. So the trend in the Turkish foreign policy is just decreasing importance of the Central Asia in the soft power and more focus on the, interestingly, Middle East, but also North Africa and the even Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. Now, let me talk about the makeup of my chapter in the book. I said that I will be talking about the first education, religious affairs, culture, and the development aid. With regard to religious affairs, first I worked on the Diyanet institution of Turkey, and then after that I searched on the Gülen movement. Gülen movement, the Gülenists were active after the independence of the Central Asian states. Following this, I've searched the participation of the other Turkish state institutions, like there's the presidency in Turkey, presence of the Turks abroad. So the terminology is even at the Turks abroad, the approach of this. And after that, I look for the Ministry of National Affairs activities in the Central Asia. Here, what I found, and first what I did, let me tell about this. It is very surprising that there is not such kind of detailed statistical search on the numbers. So I searched the Diyanet and the Turkish religious affairs bulletins and the resources, and then I just pick all the numbers. How many students are coming? How many students are going? What are the scholarship programs, training programs, publications provided to Central Asia, construction business in Central Asia, meaning mosque building or such kind of education centers building. And then I did the same thing for the Gülenist movement. This I faced a difficulty in my search because, you know, after the coup attempt, the Gülenist web pages, the research activities are just hard to reach. So, but still I could find enough material, I guess. After that, I searched the other development aid and the Minister of National Education, Turkish National Education Affairs, student exchanges and everything about this. So I don't want to talk about the statistics. There are lots of numbers in my chapter about how many books exchanged, how many students came, what they did in this region. But what I want to talk about the trends, what I found after all these things. First of all, approaching Central Asia was a zeal, was a rush, similar to the rush to gold, but different Turkish institutions did their own things, and there wasn't any central institutional framework governing or coordinating all this rush. The Gülenist movement was rushing there. The state institutions were rushing differently. In 1990s, for example, this TİKA, Turkish Aid organization, was heavily populated by this far-right nationalists in Turkey. When you look at the other organizations like the Diyanet or other religious affairs, they were populated by different sorts of political people from Turkey, and then they were trying to increase their own interests. So that's the first thing that I found, that the lack of some kind of managing or governing body of the participation. Second thing I found in the region was the importance of Central Asia in the Turkish foreign policy. You can use the soft power and the hard power is decreasing. It constantly decreased. The numbers decreased. The people who came to Turkey for education purposes, the aid for the religious purposes, the investment, the development aid, everything lost its weight. Compared to 1990s, it is very weak now, the Turkish participation in any kind of soft power activity in Central Asia. It is because the switch of the Turkish attention to different regions, as I said. Another thing with regard to the region that I found is if we compare the countries, particularly Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, during this 25-30 years, the Turkish soft power education activities particularly became more successful compared to Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. If we talk about the Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, this was because the political problems between the countries, the political problems ended the Turkish participation or usage of the soft power in that region. Tajikistan was always the fifth country in the Central Asia for Turkey, since they are not Turkic, so it is more Turkic orientated approach. Now, another thing I found that in the 30 years of this engagement in Central Asia, Turkey became a bit successful to create a base, a human base, who knows Turkey. And Turkey now developed some kind of expertise about the region. Now there is no dream about the region like the 1990s. That's a benefit for Turkey. And the last thing I found, despite all this zeal and the activities and everything the Turkish politicians or the peoples who were designing the soft power say, the reality is this: Turkey is lacking the capabilities with regard to region compared to other actors of the soft power. And you compare with Russia, or when you compare with the China, other actors who may be employing their soft power in the region, Turkey lacks particularly economic capabilities in the region. And particularly in these days, Turkey's economic situation are worse compared to 2013 and 14. In the future, I'm not expecting the attention of the Turkish power go back again to Central Asia, as long as the political trend in Turkey continues this way. Okay, thank you. I guess that is enough.
Thank you very much. And our fourth speaker is Sebastian Peirus, who is a research professor at Central Asian Program in the Institute for European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies at George Washington University, which hosts this event. And his main areas of expertise are political systems in Central Asia, economic and social issues, Islam and religious minorities, geopolitical positioning of Central Asia, and as you will see from his presentation, also Chinese soft power in the region. So please, Sebastian.
Thank you so much, Carolina. So yes, indeed, my chapter is focusing on China's soft power in Central Asia. And how China is viewed in Central Asia is actually a complex phenomenon, because there are plenty of diverse approaches and mixed feelings among Central Asian populations. I mean, notwithstanding 20 years of increasingly prominent political, economic, and security relations, I mean, China remains poorly understood and even feared among Central Asians. And despite China's emergence as the second largest economic world power in less than 3 decades, and China's development model is unpopular, remains unpopular compared to others, and in particular that of Russia, which a majority of Central Asia still view actually as a benchmark. And strikingly, since the 2000s, articles critical of China have proliferated in Central Asian media. And of course, I mean, this debate on xenophobia in Central Asia is a point of concern for Beijing. And among many reasons, xenophobia could in a way threaten Chinese investments and economic and political ambitions in the region. So to mitigate existing or potential tension with local governments and population in Central Asia and beyond, of course, China has embarked on the policy of soft power. In other words, I mean, China has set itself the goal of winning the hearts and minds of people beyond its borders, as formulated by Joseph Nye. And to do so, China has used very diverse tools, such as promoting its culture and the development of Mandarin abroad, hosting thousands of Central Asian students in its universities, promoting its model of political stability and sustainability, which would be different and independent from Western countries. And it also has presented itself as an economic model of development and as a country which is contributing to the development of other countries. But despite China's efforts, increasing debates among Central Asian political, academic, and expertise circles concerning Chinese presence and policies, as well as an increasing xenophobic narrative in local media, suggest that Beijing is actually struggling to turn its charm offensive into an effective use of soft power. And this so far limited impact is not to say that China's soft power policy is doomed to fail in Central Asia or globally, but its success will depend on the capacity of Chinese authorities to respond to imponderables and their ability to learn from experience and revise their strategy accordingly. So let me just mention briefly a few points here that I have in the few minutes which remain. So first, on the economic level, the effectiveness of China's strategy to present itself as an economic model will rely on its ability to make its economic system sustainable and to successfully promote it as a success story. The continuation, for example, of the economic slowdown that China has been experiencing since the second half of the 2010s could instead demonstrate a kind of a stark contrast between the Chinese official narrative about its economic progress and a bleaker reality on the ground, and would certainly damage the perception of Beijing's model of development. And this is a point which is regularly mentioned in articles criticizing China in Central Asia. On the other hand, China's ostentatious display of its economic power on the international stage since the 2000s has increasingly contrasted with a narrative it has used since the 1990s, portraying itself as a developing country supporting poor and less developed countries. So China and the Belt Road Initiative are more and more viewed as an economic power whose weight and influence are increasingly unbalanced and would even serve essentially China's interests, which could deepen the gap between Chinese power and countries in transition. On the political level, I mean, the repressive nature of the Chinese political system, which has been even more openly wielded by Xi Jinping than his predecessor Hu Jintao, is likely to significantly hamper the effectiveness of China's soft power through the oppressive reactions it generates abroad. And since 2017, the disclosure of re-education camp in Xinjiang, as well as a ban imposed by the Chinese administration preventing several hundred ethnic Kazakh and Kyrgyz from leaving the country, has significantly damaged the image of China in the region. Another point I would like to mention briefly is the implementation of soft power policy. I mean, China's soft power policy has been designed and implemented almost exclusively by political authorities, by Chinese political authorities and by state structures. But as demonstrated by Joseph Nye or by David Shambo in the case of China, soft power is largely about the capacity of a society to attract others rather than a government to persuade others, which means that with this approach, China has somewhat a confused governmental public diplomacy with soft power. I mean, the main distinction between soft power and public diplomacy is that soft power largely originates from society, while public diplomacy is an instrument in the hands of governments. Of course, I mean, public diplomacy can contribute to the promotion of soft power. However, its impact is likely to be weakened, significantly weakened, even if it's not augmented by private and independent actors. And as actually candidly recognized by a former Chinese Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Fu Ying, the Chinese government has used the terms of soft power, public diplomacy, and external publicity interchangeably. So the impact of Chinese government propaganda is likely to remain limited as long as it will not be supported by autonomous civil society actors. And I mean here, Chinese actors and local Central Asian actors will be critical in effectively propagating an image of China that is not or not anymore associated with political authorities. So that said, China's difficulty in winning people's hearts and minds abroad is not specific to Central Asia. I mean, David Chambaud's book, China Goes Global, has demonstrated the weak impact of Chinese soft power globally, including the African or South American continent, where Beijing spared really no effort in investing and promoting its model of development. But in Central Asia, I mean, local people willing and able to promote a positive image of China will be all the more important that China's geographical contiguity, demographic weight, and military power strengthen, I would say, local phobias, and especially in bordering countries. And while the growth of a xenophobic sentiment has so far been kept under control by the local government's authoritarianism, regime or policy change in the future could open up the question of China's obvious presence, as is, for example, happened in Southeast Asia. I mean, just an example here, in Indonesia, Suharto's authoritarianism had for 3 decades prevented anti-China's expression. But after 1998, as Suharto loosened his grip on power, I mean, violent demonstrations quickly started against the Chinese minority living in the country and against China's policy in the country. So to wrap up, for many Central Asian analysts and citizens, Beijing's soft power policy in Central Asia remains for now viewed as a temporary tool, concealing a kind of hard power policy designed to impose political and economic influence for the benefit of China, and potentially undermining local development and the political, economic, and social autonomy of the states of the region. But despite this so far limited impact of China's soft power in the region, this does not mean that China is systematically unpopular, and far from it, actually. China is to some extent popular among Central Asian people. Why? Because it brings many opportunities to launch a business, to trade, to make a living. But here, I'd like to add a nuance, which I think is important. I mean, considering China as an opportunity to make money and have an easier life does not necessarily mean that you admire China. Plenty of young and less young people can thank China, but this does not mean that China is winning their hearts and minds. China is getting more popular thanks to its education assistance to the region. Although here again, there might be some nuances. Yes, China is thanked for that, but does that mean that China is admired by students? Not necessarily. And a very quick example here is that I have interviewed many Central Asian students who are studying in Chinese universities, and it's striking to see how many of them are interested in studying in better conditions and receive a better education that they would have received in Central Asia. But many of them actually were not extremely interested in Chinese culture and more generally in the country. So Beijing really probably needs to go beyond showing what is specific to China and convincingly demonstrate what is or can be universal about its system and build more bridge with local people who will be ready and willing to support and promote Chinese model and concepts which have either to raise more apprehension than admiration among Central Asian populations. And I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Sebastian. I think we can start the Q&A at this point. And actually, the first 2 questions from Jeannie Beck are directed, I guess, to Sebastian and Kirill as co-editors of this volume. So the first question is, how does the volume define soft power and what are the boundaries of this concept? And related to that, does the volume focus on state-driven soft power activities only, or does it also include non-state actors or actors who are not affiliated with states? If Kirill and Sebastian, you could say something on this.
All right, thanks, Johnny Beck. Well, I actually touched on this in the introductory comments, but in terms of definition of soft power, that's fuzzy. The only commonality to which we can all defer is Joseph Nye's work. And Nye himself has had more revolutions in his thought process, it seems, than your average equatorial African country. So his foundational work dates back to the 1990s, and that's the common root from which the beautiful rose bush of diverse definitions of soft power seems to have grown. So in a nutshell, what it boils down to is indeed the proposition that soft power is a situation when you make others want what you want, as opposed to hard power, which is again fundamentally all about getting others to do what you want. So there's infinite variety of how nice soft power is interpreted instrumentally or ideationally. There is a bit of a constructivist turn in some of the chapters. So to paraphrase Van's constructivist formula, soft power is what actors make of it. And of course, part 2 of the volume is dedicated to a different kind of actors. So far, Carolina's panel focused indeed on external state projectors, but part 2 is all about local, I wouldn't say reaction, but local engagement with external efforts at projection, both in terms of responses by the governments of Central Asia and people of Central Asia, but also, as Payam's and Carolina's chapter prove beyond any doubt, non-state actors are in a category of their own. They're extremely active in trying to influence and seduce and produce what Joseph Nye called the mysterious chemistry of attraction. So we cover all bases, and that's why I think this volume is pretty robust academic.
Now, sorry, just maybe to add a point, actually, is that in this book, we also really try to see, to go beyond the definition of soft power by Joseph Nye and try to analyze how each country is adapting, I mean, revising the concept of power based on its interest and its goals. For example, I've done that in China with my chapter on China, with China really debating about the definition of Joseph Nye's concept of soft power, and of course we're using the cultural dimension of soft power, but also using a lot more economic dimension of soft power by explaining, trying to promote the idea that it is supporting Central Asian countries, the development of these countries, the improvement of well-being of local populations, or also by insisting on the political dimension of the soft power, meaning non-intervention, non-interference in the local government and the politics. So what I really want to say here is that one of the goals of this book was also really to try to see how each country's projecting a soft power policy in the region has been, in a way, readapting or somewhat revising the concept of soft power as defined by Joseph Nye.
Thank you, Sebastian. And the next question is about Turkey. So this is a question to Murat. It's a question about Turkish relations with Turkmenistan, but also other countries, for example, through Turkish construction companies. And the related question about Turkish cultural products, such as soap operas and dramas. If you could comment on the impact of these products in Central Asia. We cannot hear you, Murat. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. In fact, in the last part of the article, I wrote about the Turkish soap operas and the impact of these Turkish soap operas. Here, I did not want to enter the details, but I also provide some details about the success of the Turkish soap operas films in the Central Asian region. It was a big success. It is also some sort of commercial adventure, in fact, for the Turkish soap opera makers and the film producers. For example, when you talk about the numbers, and I'm now looking at the numbers again, from 2001, when the first Turkish export to Central Asia started as a Delirek, Met Crazy Heart. It was the first soap opera in 2001, and after that, to Kazakhstan, for example, 42 different Turkish series were sold, and then they were on the Kazakh TVs. It is similar to other countries too. Muhteşem Yüzyıl was a big success in Uzbekistan, for example. So even Uzbekistan, I'm saying, because the political relations was not good with Uzbekistan at that time. That is a good example of the Turkish soft power, if we are talking about. So the Turkish soap operas, selling them also was some kind of big profitable business, particularly after this Muhteşem Yüzyıl, the Magnificent Century, which was broadcast in hundreds of countries all around the world, including the Central Asia. This turned into a totally commercial adventure for the Turkish film sector. In the chapter, I am making a quote about this thing. When they sold the first soap opera to Central Asia, they sold $30 per episode. Now they are selling $200,000 per episode for the Muhteşem Yüzyıl. So there's the increase of the price. Yes, with regard to introduction of the Turkish culture living in the experience in Turkey, they became a very big success in the Central Asia, I can say. In the article, there are details, lots of numbers and statistics about this culture too. The question is right. It has been a very big success.
Thank you very much. And then we have a few questions to Sebastian about China. So I will combine them together. So if you could say a few words about the potential or the actual role of Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a channel or forum for China's soft power in the region. Another question is about the impact of Xinjiang on relations between Central Asia and China and soft power, Chinese soft power. And the third question is about civil society groups such as Communist Youth League. If you looked at that, so non-state Chinese actors projecting their soft power. Please, Sebastian.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, so I mean, the SCO, is taken by China as a tool of soft power, just to reflect exactly what I was saying, meaning contributing to the economic development of the region through trade agreements, through a way again to improve the lives, the well-being of populations. The SCO is also used as a tool of soft power to say that we are allied and where our goal is to go beyond the political interference of Western countries. So the SCO, yes, is definitely viewed and used as a tool, as part of the soft power of China. On the impact, yes, of Xinjiang, I would say that Xinjiang, frankly speaking, I didn't conduct interviews specifically on this topic. I haven't been able to do that this last 2 years due to the pandemic. But what I read is that indeed what's happening right now in Xinjiang, the fact that we have a lot of information on what we can call concentration camps, have a big impact on how China is viewed especially from Kazakhstan, from Kyrgyzstan, from Tajikistan. We have seen an increasing numbers of articles, newspapers articles published really criticizing China. We have seen also demonstrations, I mean, with people being repressed in Kazakhstan. I mean, all this last year, I mean, people demonstrating and trying to support their co-ethnic Kazakh or Kyrgyz in Xinjiang being repressed. So, I mean, overall, yes, it definitely gives a bad image, and certainly damages the impact of Chinese soft power in Central Asia. What was the third question? I'm so sorry, I forgot all about.
The third one was about non-state actors, Chinese civil society, the youth, for example, organizations, Communist Youth League.
Well, I mean, there are some non-state actors, but I would say so far, I mean, most of soft power is Chinese soft power is largely dominated by state actors. I mean, you have some non-state actors, for example, Chinese medicine. Let me give you an example. Chinese medicine is developing in Central Asia with some medical centers which are not necessarily connected to the state, but generally speaking, for example, the main elements of China's soft power in Central Asia, like Confucius centers, are mostly, I mean, connected to the state. So that's what I was saying. I mean, this is where the problem is with Chinese soft power, is that most of it is relying on its own state actors, and China really needs to go probably to go beyond that.
Thank you. And the next question is to Vincent about Peace Corps and Fulbright programs. How influential or helpful have they been in Central Asia?
Well, I think the answer kind of depends on what you mean by influential or successful. Peace Corps has largely not existed in most of Central Asia for quite some time. At this point, if I'm not mistaken, it's only Kyrgyzstan has active Peace Corps programs right now, and it's my sense that those do make some difference on the local level. Fulbright is active, I think, everywhere except for Turkmenistan, and allows for local students to study abroad, as well as American students to go there. And it's my sense that these do aid in fostering intercultural dialogue, in fostering connections between the United States and Central Asian countries, and in increasing maybe appreciation of American values for Central Asians who are able to study here. But if ultimately the point of soft power is to sway regimes into doing what you want them to do, then I would say that none of these things have been very successful at all, right? Not only, again, have the Peace Corps programs been either booted out or sort of abruptly ended for various reasons, but it doesn't seem that any of the Central Asian countries are moving in a strongly pro-American direction at all. So are they successful in winning some hearts and minds among some people in some places? Sure. But if we're talking about whether they're ultimately aiding in American geostrategic goals in the region, I'm a bit more jaded about that. Which doesn't mean that they're not worthwhile, but if we're talking about soft power in the sense that Nye sort of defines it, I'm not entirely sure that they really have paid off.
Thank you. So the next questions are to Kirill, and also I will combine them and add my own one. So first of all, Kirill, could you comment a bit more on the toolbox of Russia's soft power? What exactly does Russia include in that term? A related question is about the vaccine diplomacy. So if you could say a few words about Sputnik. And my own question, you mentioned that Russia introduced this term only in 2010, soft power, so it was reactive in this respect, but actually Russia has been doing soft power, perhaps without calling it this way, for many other years when we look at the number of scholarships for Central Asian students. So why do you think this term was introduced, and what did it actually change? Please.
Thanks, Carolina. And I also noticed that this overlaps with Edward Schatz's question in general about the demand side of soft power. In a nutshell, very in a kind of cursory manner, the arsenal that Russia uses in its soft power projection is not in principle different to what everyone else does. It's just that the relative weight that Russia attaches to certain things varies. For instance, international developmental aid is a very important function of instrument of soft power projection. Russia is hopelessly behind compared to China and even the United States. It just doesn't do enough on that front. Public diplomacy. Russia is learning very quickly. And again, once Russia abandoned its its imperial or post-imperial hubris, it's doing quite well. So politician to politician contacts of the second and third tier and all these interfaces. I'm actually astounded how many fora happen pretty much every week featuring Russian and Central Asian interlocutors. The third element that is quite important is, as you mentioned, education. And I completely agree with you that Russia has traditionally deployed that particular form of influence in Central Asia, but it's a very recent phenomenon when it had become instrumentalized, and now there's coordination between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the one hand and the Ministry of Education on the other hand. And this plays out in terms of how many quotas the Ministry of Education assigns to individual Central Asian republics. So there's definitely a correlation. When the going gets tough in Tajikistan, when there is some stroppiness about the presence of the Russian military base or something like this, Moscow suddenly becomes a bit more generous, just a little bit. But it's an unmistakable trend. So that's the sheer instrumentalization and greater coordination between departments. And last but not least, of course, is strategic communication. And here I mentioned Sputnik, and I think it's Manlai's question about active measures. I think for me, it's the only visible, at least through open intelligence sources, public domain sources, avatar of Russian active measures is indeed via Sputnik. It does interesting things. It has a very vast network of correspondence, and it does influence public agenda from time to time. One interesting example is Tajikistan 2014, where through Sputnik and the information campaign, approval rating for Putin's action in Crimea was higher than in Russia itself. From memory, it was like 91% of Tajik citizens said, "Yay, Putin, Crimea is ours." The figure was bigger than in Russia. Having said that, of course, special activities, government-funded subversive influencing operations take place. They pale into insignificance compared to the cumulative commercial flow of Russian media product to Central Asia. And that's where, again, I think Edward Schatz's comment is very important. To put it simply, why do Kazakhs or Tajiks or Kyrgyz watch Masha and the Bear or such like program or Russian stand-up comedy? It's not because Putin had weaponized the beloved bear or because the Kremlin had weaponized the humor. It's because it caters to the sensibilities of especially younger generations in Central Asia. They want more of that stuff, not because Kremlin wants them to consume. They want to consume more of such product, together, of course, with Turkish soap operas and such like things. So thus, to round it all up, of course, we have to be wary about Russian active measures. It's not the whole story at all. If we are to understand the gamut of Russian influence and seduction in Central Asia, we have to go so much wider than just Putin's evil agents.
Thank you, Kirill. So on this note, our time is over, and I can invite Dilnoza Ubaidulayeva to moderate the second panel, which will be about the reception of soft power.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to panel 2. The theme of the panel is, as Carolina said, is between attraction and fear, how recipient countries welcome, frame, or resist soft power. We have 4 speakers. And each speaker will be talking for about 10 minutes. You can, in the meantime, type in your questions in the chat section, and we'll have a Q&A after the speakers have presented their talks. So our first speaker is Aminat Chokobayeva. Aminat is an honorary affiliate at the University of Sydney. She holds a PhD in Central Asian Studies from the Australian National University and has previously taught at the University of Sydney. Her research interests include the early 20th century history of Central Asia and nation building in independent Central Asian republics. Aminat, the floor is yours, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I have to apologize for the webcam. It may appear as if I'm looking aside or if I'm looking down, but actually the camera is sitting on top of my screen, so I'm looking at the screen. Right. So I should probably start by saying that if we take the strictest definition of soft power as it was elaborated by Joseph Nye, soft power actually does not apply to non-democratic countries. And China and Russia are not democracies. So the definition that we used, is inspired by Nye, but it's certainly broader. All right, sorry. I would also like to say that in the final analysis, or at least based on my findings, it doesn't really matter whether China or Russia have soft power in Central Asia and in Kyrgyzstan in particular, simply because Kyrgyzstan is so dependent on both Russia and China. It's economically dependent and it's politically dependent. So soft power is nice, but it's not necessary because both China and Russia have enough instruments in their toolbox to make Kyrgyzstan, and by extension, most countries of Central Asia, to do as they wish. Right. So what I did instead, and while doing my research, well, actually our research, since it's a co-author chapter, I found that the sources or the instruments of hard power, or the instruments, or the instruments of power that we use, that we usually think about as hard power, actually have soft power dimensions, whereas the instruments of soft power, again, those instruments, or at least the instruments that we're used to thinking about as soft power, are not that soft in practice. They actually are implemented in a hard way, or they have the hard power implications for the Central Asian republics. So again, we focused on Kyrgyzstan since that's where I come from, and since this is where it was easiest for me to gauge sort of public opinion and to get a feel of what the public thinks. And again, because I come from Kyrgyzstan, I had access to all of the information. Right, so we looked at mass media, we looked at development aid, and we looked at labor migration as sources of, again, sources of soft power that nonetheless have hard power dimensions. So I'll probably start with mass media. Again, we all tend to think about mass media as a source of soft power, but in reality, in Kyrgyzstan, the presence of Russian media is very much hard, right? Or again, it has dimensions of hard power. So in Kyrgyzstan, and mass media is very important in Kyrgyzstan because 97% of the population in Kyrgyzstan has access to TV and only 34% has access to internet. And Sputnik, which was mentioned earlier today, and which is a part of the Russia Today network, has an office in Bishkek and reports both in Russian and Kyrgyz. But there are two Russian TV channels that are actually even more important and more influential than Sputnik, and these are ORT and RT. Right? And ORT is usually referred to in Kyrgyzstan as Первый канал, or the first channel, even though it's not a national channel, even though it's a foreign channel. Anyway, it's very popular, and a lot of people watch it, including in the countryside where people speak mostly Kyrgyz. What's interesting about both ORT and RTR is that they come in the so-called social package, which includes, which is usually limited to national channels alone. And so what it means, the inclusion in the social package means that these two channels, they don't pay fees for broadcasting in Kyrgyzstan, and they're given the same status as national channels. And that was a decision, I think, that was, again, by all indications, that was imposed or sort of forced onto the Kyrgyz government by the Russian government. So the ORT, as I said, in particular, is very influential. And in the past, it was also used to sway popular opinion in Kyrgyzstan. So in March 2010, during popular protests against the Bakiyev government, the ORT and Izvestia, which is a sort of a weekly newspaper in Russia, they launched a campaign against Bakiyev and his family. And obviously there was a lot of discontent directed against Bakiyev. So ORT might not have been the most decisive factor, but it certainly intensified, right, the discontent and the hatred directed towards Bakiyev and his government. So ORT, for example, broadcast investigations and TV shows dedicated to the corruption in the Bakiyev government and to sort of Bakiyev's family role in the corruption schemes. So again, mass media in Kyrgyzstan, at least the Russian mass media in Kyrgyzstan, is not really a tool of soft power. It's more of a tool of coercive power, right? As that has been used in the past by the Russian government. So the second source of soft power that we looked at is development aid. And here we've mostly focused on Chinese development aid in Kyrgyzstan, simply because China is the single largest lender to Kyrgyzstan, as it is to Tajikistan. Right? So in 2017, Chinese loans made up more than 41% of Kyrgyzstan's total external debt. Now, Chinese loans are very attractive to Central Asian countries. Firstly, because China is perhaps the only country that can provide large loans to Central Asian republics. Second, Chinese loans don't usually come with with demands for political or economic reforms, which again makes them attractive to Central Asian republics. At the same time, and of course, China also positions itself as a sort of a developing nation through what it calls South-South collaboration. Unfortunately, the terms of repayment for Chinese loans are very harsh. So first, Chinese loans are denominated in US dollars, meaning that it's difficult for Central Asian republics to repay those loans since they are in the US dollars. Second, many of these loans are short-term, so a lot of these loans have to be repaid within 5 years. Third, Chinese creditors require recipient countries to employ Chinese contractors, which in turn also employ Chinese laborers. So I checked some statistics, and in 2018, there were around 80,000 legal Chinese labor migrants in Kyrgyzstan. The unofficial number may be higher. And these migrants worked on mainly on the construction works, road construction works, and sort of infrastructure construction works. So what it means is that if Kyrgyzstan is unable to repay its loans, the Chinese government may demand Kyrgyzstan's assets. That would include land. It could also include mines, and of course, the Chinese government could also put pressure on Kyrgyzstan, especially when it comes to the Uyghur minority in Kyrgyzstan. So in the past, Kyrgyzstan has deported Uyghur individuals to China, and I reckon that will sort of continue. So again, development aid, which is often considered to be a source of soft power, in practice is not soft at all. It's very much hard power. The third source of soft power, immigration, and as many of you know, immigration is sort of soft power is often measured as an ability to attract migrants. And by that measure, Russia would sort of be a source of soft power for Central Asia simply because it attracts so many labor migrants. There were around 800,000 labor migrants from Kyrgyzstan in Russia a couple of years ago. Again, that's an official number, and an official number maybe slightly higher. But Russia has used the labor migrants from Central Asia as a leverage, as a tool against the Central Asian countries. So it has threatened on a number of occasions countries such as Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Okay, I have a reminder from Dilnoza that I'm running over 10 minutes. Yes, again, labor migrants have been used as a tool of hard power by Russia, and it threatened Kyrgyzstan it threatened to introduce a visa regime in order to put pressure on Kyrgyzstan. At the same time, energy diplomacy and Russian military presence in Central Asia, which are usually considered to be sources of hard power, in fact, can become sources of soft power, because when Russia exports energy, it sort of also becomes partly dependent on the countries that it exports its energy to. And the Russian military base in Kyrgyzstan is seen as a source as a security provider in Kyrgyzstan and Central Asia, and its presence is seen as desirable, not just by the government, but by the regular people. Okay, and that's it. I apologize for being so slow and for taking such a long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aminat. Our next speaker is Ruyul Hanks. Ruyul Hanks is a professor of Geography at Oklahoma State University and holds Humphreys Endowed Chair in International Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences. Dr. Hanks was a Fulbright Scholar in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, and has published numerous articles and book chapters on national identity, security, and political geography in Central Asia. The floor is yours, please. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Excellent. Thank you, Dilnoza. And I want to thank Kirill and Sebastian for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this volume. And by the way, it indicates that I am Cami Hanks. I'm not Cami Hanks, I am Ruel Hanks. And that is actually, for some reason, the link out of my email connects to my daughter's Google account. She'll be thrilled to know that she was made famous today by Google, but it's actually Ruel. I have no gender identity issues right now or anything like that. So my chapter is a comparative analysis of soft power influence of Russia and China in Kazakhstan. And I initially wrestled with some of the problems or some of the questions that Kirill raised early, and having to do with, first of all, how do we define soft power? And more importantly, from my perspective, what metric can we use to measure soft power? How do we get it really its influence in any particular state? And I settled on a concept of trying to frame that problem through the context of branding or a national brand. And so I'll be using that to some degree in some of my comments today. To state the obvious, both Russia and China have enormous geographic advantage in terms of soft power with Kazakhstan because of the proximity of the two countries. Russia, of course, has the world's longest continuous border with Kazakhstan, and China has a long border as well. China's primary vehicle for soft power in the region are its economic linkages, most prominently the energy trade, and of course the BRI. Russia has enormous soft power advantages geographically, demographically, historically, and culturally. Kirill mentioned that Russia seems to have gotten out of the gate a little bit late, but they are the most successful soft power player in the region, and I would concur with that. That's primarily due, I think, to the fact that Russia is the former, some might say the current political hegemon in the region. And of course, in the case of Kazakhstan, Russia, there are 20% of the population in Kazakhstan remains ethnically Russian, 1 in every 5. So 2 centuries of integration with Russian culture and the influence of the Russian presence is prominently displayed in the Kazakh cultural landscape today. In terms of welcoming, framing, or resisting the soft power, which is what this panel is supposed to be about, the soft power projected by Russia and China, it's really quite a complex situation in Kazakhstan. My basic argument was that despite overwhelming advantages, neither China nor Russia is as successful at using soft power as might be expected in the case of Kazakhstan. China, for example, even with its huge investments in the energy sector and dangling the allure, of course, of even greater largesse via BRI, has really failed to secure a positive image or positive brand, if you will, with the Kazakhstani public. And this is borne out by some metrics. What I'm going to use as metrics in many cases are in fact public surveys that survey the Kazakhstani public in terms of their attitudes towards various countries, etc. And Open Society conducted or sponsored actually a survey in April of 2020 that indicated that 55% of Kazakhstanis want less Chinese influence in the country. When they were asked to identify a, quote, primary enemy among international actors, 10% identified China, and that was the highest rating of any country among the Kazakhstani public. Only 4% stated that they wanted China to serve as a model for development in Kazakhstan. And these are really startling numbers. These are shocking numbers in some ways, considering all of the efforts and all the investment that China has made in the country of Kazakhstan. Russian soft power, for reasons that I've previously described, has been more welcome. Russia is able to project its soft power in Kazakhstan via economic linkages as well, like China, but its cultural imprint there is its greatest advantage. The ubiquitous use of Russian language, for example, allows for a penetration of the domestic media environment, and that really is unavailable to any other state trying to inject its soft power into Kazakhstan. The media advantage extends really across every manifestation. It's in the print media, the broadcast media, and the internet and social media in Kazakhstan. Although, in the time since this chapter was published, some further research I've done has led me to believe that maybe the latter, in terms of social media, is actually evolving. I'll get to that in a little bit later with some final comments. So examples of broadcast media would be, of course, the channel Russia Today, or RT. Everyone, I suppose, knows that and probably has watched it at one point or another. RT doesn't broadcast in Kazakhstan any longer as of 2018, but was available for a long time. And there would be too many examples of Russian language broadcasting, with a lot of that broadcasting actually being produced in Russia itself. There's also, of course, Russian language broadcasting that's produced within Kazakhstan that appears on the broadcast media in Kazakhstan. But much of the programming is actually produced in Russia itself still. I should hasten to add that there's some recent research which I cite in the chapter, that the amount of Russian language programming, particularly that's produced in Russia, is declining in Kazakhstani broadcast media. But exactly how much, how profound that decline is still somewhat up in the air, I think. And I don't have really anything to offer in terms of what the impact that might have at this point. Yeah, so let me turn to some of the evidence that seems to confirm the success of Russian soft power there to promote this brand among young Kazakhs. Surveys conducted in 2016, it's a little bit dated, but it's only 6 years ago, indicated that 72% of the young Kazakhstanis who were questioned were either very interested or, quote, interested in political events in Russia. And one of the astonishing things about this survey was that 72% was actually higher than when they were asked about following political events in the Central Asian region itself. In other words, this survey seems to indicate they're more interested in political events in Russia than they are in their own region, which is quite remarkable if that indeed is the case. That same percentage, 72%, favored closer relations with Russia. So if I'm looking at this, the context of branding, this really confirmed for me that Russia has done a very good job in terms of elevating its brand among the Kazakhstani public, particularly among youth in Kazakhstan. Only 18%, by the way, in that survey favored closer relations with the US, which is not really a focus of my chapter anyway, but that's a pretty paltry sum for the United States and for the West in general. Now, I have to add the caveat that there are other surveys done more recently that seem to show some erosion of the Russian image, of the Russian brand. That Open Society survey that I mentioned a few moments ago from April 2020 revealed that 17% of the respondents desire a lower profile for Russia in Kazakhstan. Now, you might say that's pretty low. That's under 20%, but on the other hand, it's almost 20%. So it's almost 1 in 5 of the respondents favor a lower image or a less prominent projection of Russian soft power in Kazakhstan by that metric. To me, that's relatively high, given Russia's enormous advantages in Kazakhstan vis-a-vis China or anyone else. Only 55% in that survey trusted the quality of Russian goods. I'm not sure what that means, but that's a pretty high percentage as well. I see Dilnoza is reminding me of my time, so I want to just toss out a couple of things that really have come onto my radar screen since I wrote this chapter. I didn't have a lot to say in the chapter actually about social media, but in the interim, there have been a lot of interesting developments, as many of you know, in Kazakhstan regarding social media. And I think social media is the new frontier for examining soft power in many ways. There have not been a lot of studies. Something that really sparked my interest in this a few months ago was a study that was published on EurasiaNet that was conducted actually by the person who I think might have been the original chair of this panel, Dana Rice from Australian National University, which indicated that young Kazakhs are actually migrating to Western platforms, Western social media platforms, away from things like VK and Odnoklassniki. They're migrating over to Instagram, YouTube, Telegram, some of those platforms. That's a very interesting development. And if there is a shift in that development, in that direction, that opens up a whole new world of research, I think, on this topic in Kazakhstan in particular. But it's hard to stay up with things regarding social media in Central Asia. As some of you know, just in the last couple of days, there have been reports that, what is it, Mega now, which is the new word, the new title for Facebook, has been sharing data and access with the Kazakhstani government. And of course, Instagram is owned by Facebook. So what impact that has on the use of Instagram by Kazakhstani youth is anybody's guess, but it's certainly fodder for the next chapter I write for someone perhaps on Kazakhstan and soft power. Thank you for your attention and listening to me.
Thank you very much, Will. Our next speaker is Karolina. So Karolina Kucheska is a postdoctoral researcher at the Ghent Institute for International and European Studies at Ghent University. Her research investigates development aid and localization of global governance frameworks in Central Asia. She also has practical work experience in the development sector in Tajikistan. Karolina, please.
Thank you, Dilnoza. So now I will take you to Tajikistan, and we'll talk about soft power that is a bit different from what we heard about so far. And this is a chapter which we wrote together with Payam Turki, who is also here. So I will say my part, and then he will add his thoughts on this. I guess that we agree on lots of things, but as two different individuals, there are also points on which we do not agree, which is a normal process. So I will start by saying that both mine and Payam's interest in civil society is related to our positionality. So I guess it's worth mentioning what this is all about. Payam, which he will tell you later about it, he has been working in Tajikistan since 1995 for the OSCE and other organizations. I was working in Tajikistan since 2013, including in the NGO sector. So we are interested in civil society, however we define it, because we have been both present and working in spaces of civil society. This is why we approach this topic both as practitioners and as researchers. We take a little bit of an experimental approach in our research, because we analyze soft power of an idea. Not soft power of a specific agent, a country or an organization, like many other contributors. But what is this idea about? This is an idea about neoliberal civil society, which is implemented by many agents who are international organizations, donor states that provide funding for local NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So for some of these agents, of course, civil society is the main sphere of activity, but for others, it's just a small part of projects which they implement. And civil society in this way is, for example, linked to women's empowerment, free elections, and many other fields. So we try to think about how, through development assistance, a non-tangible idea of soft power is actually turned into a tangible product, and the product are NGOs. Of course, this story is not just the story of Tajikistan. This is a typical story of many aid dependent countries, especially since 91 and the end of the Cold War, when civil society became tied to liberalism, democratization, and also emergence of free market. So you can think about other countries where this also happened. And of course, NGOs are not the only form of civil society in Central Asia. This is, I think, obvious for everyone who is here. There are other forms, Mahalla, Bazaar, Chaykhona, and so on. But we talk about NGOs because this is related to our experience. At the same time, it is a bit tricky and also dangerous to talk about NGOs as Western soft power, because there is a risk of falling into this foreign agent narrative, and this is definitely not our aim. We want to give justice to activism within the NGO sector, and also look at motivations that push people to work for NGOs, and why they decide to express themselves in this way and not other. And I think that one doesn't contradict another. You can have international funding, and you can have also genuine activism in the NGO sector. So just to guide you through our research, there is a comparative dimension here, because we try to analyze how neoliberal society was perceived and received locally in the 90s and nowadays, looking at similarities and differences and what this is related to. So I will quickly guide you through that. At the beginning, in the 90s, when NGOs started growing, you can even say mushrooming, in Tajikistan, there was one specific societal group that was targeted by this form of soft power. These were local activists who, with the Soviet collapse, lost the space for the activism. So these are former Soviet intelligentsia, right? Many people who previously worked for the Soviet state in cultural and community activism, for example, in Komsomol or Zhensavieti, the Women's Council. So they owed their organizational skills and this leadership capacities, we can even say, to the Soviet state. But then, of course, with the Soviet collapse, they risked, they were excluded from the system that was being formed in Tajikistan. And this is especially the case of women who were pushed out of political spaces during the Tajik civil war in 92-97. So local activists became attracted to the idea of neoliberal civil society because, and here we can refer to Joseph Snaith's framework, there was a dignity, competence, and beauty that this kind of soft power manifested in the country. So, of course, benignity, what it means. NGOs offered spaces to these local activists, offered spaces, and with that, decent socioeconomic conditions, right? Because it's about spaces, but also funding that comes with that. So they offered decent salaries in a context where no one actually had decent salaries in the country. When it comes to competence, neoliberal civil society was also a very powerful idea because by working in the NGO sector, people were gaining new skills. So the NGO space, it offered people, local activists, a chance to become part of this regional and international networks and coalitions of NGOs. But there's also an inspiration. So this is this charisma and beauty, because NGOs offered a new value system in a context where there was this ideational vacuum created by the collapse of Soviet communism. So when we look at reactions, initially, the central government in the 1990s was not against NGOs. Of course, this is, we can interpret it as a sign of democracy, but I would rather say this was just because the state had other priorities, including the ongoing war. So simply the state did not interfere in the NGO sector because it was busy with other things happening in the country. It just didn't interfere in formation of the NGO sector. When we look at local governments, there was always, and until now, there is still more understanding between NGOs and local governments at the local level rather than NGOs and the central government. And this is because, especially in the 90s, local authorities lacked basic funding to continue their work in an efficient way. And especially this was the case in areas of the country which were most affected by the war, such as Hatlon, Rasht, and Pamir Mountains. So in this way, in the 90s, NGOs took over this welfare provision role of local authorities, and they were providing the population with basic services such as, you can think about everything, starting from potable water and gas supplies, reconstruction of sewage system, medicine, and also education. Then when we look at the general population in the 90s, NGOs were very active in assisting women and children in particular, when we take into account that there were 25,000 war widows during the civil war and also 55,000 war orphans. So people turned to NGOs for any kind of support, like food and medical services. Then when we look at what is happening recently in recent years, first of all, the activists themselves, the NGO workers, are less happy with their donors, so also with the idea of civil society than they used to be. And this is, first of all, because increasing conditionality of funding. There is much less free hand that these activists are given to design the project in the way which they themselves find suitable for local communities. Secondly, there is also bureaucratization, this projectization of development aid, and all of these causes a lot of resentment that is growing in the sector. But what is interesting is that this resentment is rather material rather than ideational. So this is not, this resentment is not framed around issues such as how do we understand civil society? What is the role of civil society? This is more about funding and about a kind of lack of ownership on part of donors. Shortly, when we look at how central government currently positions itself towards NGOs, we need to differentiate between different NGOs, because obviously those that work on clearly or strictly political issues will face problems, and this is the common story in the whole post-Soviet space. But at the same time, the central government remains positive towards NGOs that expand their work to the social sector, work with economically vulnerable groups. So this is exactly the same process that we see, for example, in Russia and Kazakhstan currently, which means that NGOs that want to work with children with disabilities or on medical issues such as HIV/AIDS are welcome to do so, others maybe not. Local authorities actually maintain still a very positive approach, kind of attitude to NGOs, but again, this is a pragmatic collaboration on this clearly material grounds, and it became a common practice that local authorities are just outsourcing to NGOs many services which then they themselves should be providing to the population, but do not do it as a combination of different factors. For example, lack of skilled personnel because people are leaving to Russia, which gives them more income than working for the government, or insufficient budget which they have on their disposal. And also the population, again, those who have something to do with NGOs, those who receive any kind of assistance will be more positive, whereas those, it doesn't mean that the others are negative towards NGOs, it just means that they are simply not interested in NGO activities. I will finish here by saying that it is perhaps a paradox when we treat a neoliberal society as a form of soft power. It is a paradox that there has not been much of liberal spillover, let's say, through this kind of NGO activism, but it doesn't mean that there is no liberal activism in Tajikistan. There is a lot. These are journalists, bloggers, animal and eco activists more recently, but their kind of liberal activism is really a grassroots activism. It's not influenced by any kind of outside actors. So maybe Payan can say if this is a good or a bad sign, what it tells us about civil society. I finish here.
Thank you, Carolina. With this, we'll now move on to the Q&A session. Just looking at the chat section, I can see that some of our speakers have already engaged with the audience. I'll just read the first question. It could be for Aminat, maybe to consider answering. So just the question is just going back when we just started. So I think the question about, so basically it was the assistance the China is offering in terms of development into Central Asian states. As some countries, it happens to be that they pay back by ports. What will be the situation when it's with the same matter with regards to Central Asian states? That was basically the meaning of that question.
I was muted. Yes, so as I said in the presentation, that could be mining concessions. So gold mining is an attractive sort of prospect for Chinese companies in Kyrgyzstan, but potentially even land, territory of Kyrgyzstan. In the past, Central Asian republics have ceded parts of the contested territory to China. So I would not exclude that possibility. Does that answer the question?
Thank you, Aminat. The next question could be for all speakers, whoever would be interested to answer. So we often address how the US, the EU, or Russia and China conduct soft power policy in Central Asia and beyond. What about Central Asian countries' own policy to exert soft power? I'm thinking especially about Kazakhstan, which has engaged in a policy of soft power in neighboring countries, but also beyond in Western countries. Could any of you talk about how and to what extent Central Asian countries are elaborating their own policy of soft power?
Dilnoz, I can chime in. In the introduction to the book, we actually deal with this very question. And of course, compared to established projectors like China, the United States, or the EU, the Central Asian republics don't have the resources, either material or intellectual, to project at the same kind of oomph and with the same scope, but they're getting there. And to borrow from Royal Hank's idea of national branding, that's the area they seem to specialize on. Suffice it to mention, and you can confirm or deny, Uzbekistan was made destination #1 by the Lonely Planet Guide for the year 2020. And this didn't happen out of the blue. This was a result of consistent activity by the Uzbek government. And there are many such examples. But only Kazakhstan, to the best of my understanding, practices international developmental aid. Other Central Asian republics simply cannot afford it. And we see what's happening in Afghanistan, for example, where Kazakhstan was pretty much first off the mark to deliver consignments of grain or flour to the suffering in Kabul, which is a good sign of soft power projection.
Yeah, I would also like to add that Kazakhstan is sponsoring Kazakh language centers abroad as well. Again, it has more money, as Kirill has noted, so it can fund these centers.
The Kazakhs also take out, on occasion, full-page ads in Western newspapers advertising the country. I haven't seen it real recently, but I've seen it several times in the recent past. And I'm not aware of any other Central Asian state that does that.
Actually, well, Kyrgyzstan does not advertise the country on the pages of plenty Western journals, but one event or one sort of thing that Kyrgyzstan has done to make it better known abroad are the Nomad Games, the World Nomad Games. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they have been relatively popular, and the photos from the taken at the Nomad Games have been published in sort of major outlets abroad. So I would say that was a fairly successful way to maybe not project soft power, but at least make Kyrgyzstan a little better known.
If I may just add a few words on Tajikistan in this case, I think in Tajikistan, the soft power so far was not the domain of the government, but it was mainly popular culture related to this Persianized world. So of course, so far there has been more movement from Iran, let's say, in terms of cultural influences to Tajikistan, but in recent years, many singers such as Shabnami Surayeva or Mehrin Gori Rustam are also reaching out to their market. So this can be also seen as non-state soft power. But also, as we speak, this is more of discursive soft power, which is just in development. But the stance of the Tajik government on the current situation in Afghanistan also marks some kind of a shift, because so far Tajikistan has never been interested in ethnic Tajiks living outside of Tajikistan, for example, in Uzbekistan. But now the Tajik government making a stance that it will recognize the government, Taliban government of Afghanistan only if this is an inclusive government that recognizes rights of the ethnic Tajik population. I think that is also kind of following in this category of discursive soft power.
Thank you very much for your views. Unless there are other further answers to the question, I'll just move on to the next one. So there's a question about the future for NGOs and democratic space in the region, particularly in countries such as Kyrgyzstan, which have traditionally been seen as more open. Aminat, would you like to tell your views?
The future of NGOs? Well, they will depend on the financing from Western donors. So, but so far they have functioned successfully, and despite sort of the latest attempts of the new government to put pressure on the NGOs, they're still there, and I think the government recognizes that they provide livelihood for a group of people. So I don't think much will change. The NGOs will continue doing their work, but at the same time, they will also depend on the money coming from international organizations or international donors. So I'm not sure. So what the question was. So yeah. Sorry, Carolina.
If I may just pick up on the NG question, because it's a fairly similar situation in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan in this respect. Of course, Kyrgyz NGOs are more active. It's also a bigger sector, but there are similarities here. And I think that actually we will witness a kind of a fall of NGOs in the future, and this is related to the increasing conditionality of funding on the one hand from international donors. So far there has been more of, let's say, regional programs for which NGOs in Central Asia could obtain funding. So for example, funding for NGOs in Central Asia or in the post-Soviet space. But nowadays, many donors move to international funding, which is not allocated for any specific region or country. And this is where NGOs in the region from Central Asia have actually less leverage, because they are much less competitive compared to other regions which are considered, let's say, hotspots. So that can be, Ukraine, Colombia, and Syria, and so on. And the other reason for the decline of NGOs is the stance of governments in the region. So it's not actually about decline, it's about changing or reshaping the NGOs and co-opting them to work more closely with the government. This is already happening in Kazakhstan, where the government actually is allocating their own funding for NGOs, which changes the relation. So the accountability relation is now not between NGOs and international donors, but it's between NGOs and national governments. And I think this will change also the way how NGOs work. And I'm sure this will happen in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan in the next years too.
I think Kyrgyzstani NGOs are a little more competitive simply because they've been around for a lot longer.
If I may.
Very much. I can see that our speakers are already engaging with the rest of the questions that the audience had. And with this, I'd like to give the floor to maybe to Sebastian, given the time limits of the event.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Diana. Indeed, we unfortunately we need to conclude. I mean, much more obviously could be said. I mean, this is such a rich topic. So and much more is said. Actually, it's written in this book. So please feel free to read it. I mean, it's available in a paper printed version, but also electronically. I mean, you can find it on usual websites, including Amazon. It's very, very easy to find it. So again, I would like to thank all our contributors for writing their chapters, for their patience, and for being with us today. I would also like to thank the audience for their questions, for all their questions and this discussion, and we look forward to seeing you again in one of our upcoming Central Asia Program seminars. So have a good day, have a good evening, or for our colleagues in Australia, have a good night. Thank you very, very much. Goodbye.